Could powerful people really be murdered without anyone knowing the truth? Are some deaths too convenient to be accidents? What happens when the official story just doesn't add up? Number 6. Dag Hammarskjöld. What happens when the world's top diplomat dies under mysterious circumstances? How can a UN Secretary General's plane simply fall from the sky? On the night of September 17, 1961, Dag Hammarskjöld was flying to negotiate a ceasefire in the Congo crisis when his plane crashed near Ndola, northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. The Swedish diplomat had been serving as the second Secretary General of the United Nations, working to resolve conflicts around the world with remarkable independence and principle. The official investigation at the time concluded it was pilot error. Case closed, right? Not exactly. Witnesses reported seeing another aircraft firing on Hammarskjöld's plane before it crashed. Local residents claimed they saw a second plane in the sky and heard explosions. These accounts were largely dismissed by the initial inquiry. For decades, rumors swirled about potential assassination. Hammarskjöld had made powerful enemies through his work in the Congo, where he supported the newly independent government against Belgium-backed separatists. Mining companies with interests in the mineral-rich Katanga province had billions of reasons to oppose his peacekeeping efforts. In 2015, documents emerged suggesting that an American NSA listening post had intercepted radio transmissions that might reveal what really happened. Former President Harry Truman told reporters shortly after the crash, Dag Hammarskjöld was on the point of getting something done when they killed him. A 2019 documentary, Cold Case Hammarskjöld, raised even more questions when filmmaker Mads Brugger and private investigator Goran Björkdahl uncovered evidence suggesting possible involvement of mercenaries and intelligence services. They found a Belgian pilot who claimed to have shot down the plane. The UN reopened investigations multiple times, with former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon acknowledging the possibility of foul play. In 2021, a UN-appointed investigator concluded there was plausible evidence that Hammarskjöld's plane was attacked. 6 decades later, key documents remain classified in the US, UK, and other countries. The case of Dag Hammarskjöld remains one of the most significant unsolved political deaths of the 20th century. Was it really just an accident? Or did someone eliminate a man who stood in the way of powerful interests? Number 5. Félix Moumié. Have you heard of poison-tipped umbrellas? What happens when a revolutionary leader drops dead after having coffee with a mysterious stranger? Few Americans know the name Félix Roland Moumié, but in Cameroon, he's remembered as a revolutionary independence leader who died under highly suspicious circumstances. On October 15, 1960, while in exile in Geneva, Switzerland, Moumié had coffee with a man claiming to be a journalist. Shortly after, he became violently ill and died 3 days later. Swiss authorities determined he had been poisoned with thallium, a colorless, odorless, and tasteless poison once nicknamed the poisoner's poison for its deadly efficiency and difficulty in detection. The suspected killer, William Bechtel, was allegedly an agent of the French Secret Service, though he was never convicted. Moumié led the Union of the Peoples of Cameroon, UPC, a nationalist movement demanding immediate independence from France. His organization had been banned by French colonial authorities after anti-colonial riots in 1955, forcing Moumié into exile. From abroad, he continued to advocate for his country's freedom and criticized ongoing French influence in supposedly independent African nations. France had significant economic interests in Cameroon and had been fighting a bloody war against the UPC's armed wing. Documents later revealed that French authorities considered Moumié a serious threat to their interests in newly independent African nations. His elimination came at a critical moment when many African countries were gaining independence, but still negotiating how much influence their former colonial rulers would retain. The timing was suspicious. Moumié was preparing to address the United Nations about the situation in Cameroon just weeks later. He had been traveling through Africa and Eastern Europe gathering support for his cause and had made powerful enemies. Though French intelligence services have long been suspected of arranging the assassination, no government has ever admitted responsibility. Declassified documents have revealed that Western intelligence services closely monitored Moumié's movements, but conclusive evidence of who ordered his death remains elusive. Decades later, his death represents a critical moment in the story of African decolonization, raising uncomfortable questions about how far Western powers would go to protect their interests. Was Moumié's death simply a cold-blooded political assassination? Or could it have been the work of rival political factions? The truth remains buried in classified files and with witnesses who have long since taken their secrets to the grave. Number 4. Ari Neve. Can a car bomb in a government parking lot really go uninvestigated? How does a war hero and rising political star get assassinated inside one of the most secure areas in Britain? On March 30, 1979, Ari Neve turned the ignition key in his car in the underground parking lot of the British House of Commons. Seconds later, a bomb exploded, catastrophically injuring the 63-year-old Conservative Member of Parliament, who died shortly afterward at Westminster Hospital. Neve wasn't just any politician. He was a genuine war hero, the first British officer to successfully escape from the notorious German prison camp Colditz Castle during World War II. After the war, he served as a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials before entering politics. At the time of his death, he was the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and a close advisor to Margaret Thatcher, who would become Prime Minister just weeks later. The Irish National Liberation Army, a Republican paramilitary group, claimed responsibility. The assassination occurred during the Troubles, the violent ethno-nationalist conflict in Northern Ireland. Neve had advocated for a hardline policy against the IRA and related paramilitary groups, making him a target. But questions immediately arose. How did terrorists manage to plant a sophisticated mercury tilt bomb in one of the most heavily guarded parking facilities in Britain? Security at Parliament was supposedly tight, especially during this violent period of the Northern Ireland conflict. Some former intelligence officers have suggested the assassination may have had more complex origins. Neve had been investigating links between certain politicians and pedophile networks, according to some accounts. Others point to his plans to reorganize British intelligence services if Thatcher won the upcoming election, potentially threatening established power structures. Enoch Powell, another controversial British politician, claimed in 1986 that the CIA had murdered Neve, fearing his opposition to American influence in Northern Ireland policy. Writer Martin Dillon reported that a former CIA officer believed American intelligence had provided information to the INLA to facilitate the killing, though no concrete evidence has ever emerged to support these allegations. The official investigation into Neve's death was surprisingly limited, with no one ever arrested for the murder. Key documents relating to the case remain classified, and many have questioned why such a high-profile assassination received such seemingly cursory investigation. Was Ari Neve simply another victim of Northern Ireland's violent conflict? Or did his death serve other, more hidden interests? For a man with so many connections to intelligence services and controversial policies, the simplicity of the official explanation has never satisfied those who knew him best. Number 3. Heo Young-do. Would you believe a political whistleblower could accidentally drown in 3 feet of water? How does a healthy man investigating government corruption end up dead on a hiking trail? On June 4, 2016, the body of South Korean businessman and political activist Heo Young-do was found in a stream near a hiking trail on Bukhan Mountain in northern Seoul. The official cause of death was drowning, with authorities quickly ruling it an accident. They suggested the 56-year-old had slipped and fallen face first into the shallow water, where he lost consciousness and drowned. But many found the explanation difficult to believe. The stream was only about 3 feet deep at its deepest point. Heo was in good health, an experienced hiker, and the weather had been clear. More importantly, Heo had recently become a significant political problem for several powerful people. Hio wasn't primarily a politician, he was a businessman who had become a whistleblower. He had recently come forward with explosive allegations about corruption involving top South Korean politicians and business leaders. He claimed to have evidence showing illegal political slush funds and offshore accounts tied to several high-ranking officials in then-President Park Geun-hye's administration. Just days before his death, Hio had announced he would be sharing documents with prosecutors and media outlets. He had told friends he had conclusive evidence that would implicate several key figures in the government. Some reports indicated he possessed a USB drive with incriminating financial records. When his body was found, the USB drive and his phone were missing. Personal items, including his wallet, remained untouched, making robbery an unlikely motive. Friends and family immediately voiced suspicion, noting that Hio had received threats in the weeks leading up to his death. Adding to the mystery, CCTV footage from the hiking trail entrance showed Hio entering the mountain park, but cameras along the path that would have recorded his movements mysteriously malfunctioned that day. The autopsy revealed he had died around 36 hours before his body was discovered, placing his time of death in the evening hours when the park would have been nearly empty. Civil society groups and opposition politicians called for a thorough investigation, but the case was quickly closed. The timing was particularly suspicious, coming during a period of political upheaval that would eventually lead to President Park's impeachment for corruption in a separate scandal. Was Hio's death really a bizarre hiking accident? Or was it a carefully orchestrated elimination of someone about to expose corruption at the highest levels of Korean society? The official record says accident, but many Koreans remain convinced that Hio was silenced before he could speak. Number 2. Carlos Marighella. Can a revolutionary simply be gunned down in an ambush that seems too perfect? How does Brazil's most wanted man get caught so easily after evading capture for years? On the evening of November 4, 1969, Carlos Marighella was driving through São Paulo when his car was ambushed by police at an intersection. In the ensuing gunfire, the 57-year-old revolutionary was killed, ending the hunt for Brazil's most wanted man. The military dictatorship ruling Brazil celebrated the elimination of their most dangerous opponent. Marighella wasn't just any revolutionary. Once a Communist Party congressman, he had become the leading theoretician of urban guerrilla warfare in Latin America. His manual, Mini-Manual of the Urban Guerrilla, became required reading for revolutionary movements worldwide. He founded the Acao Libertadora Nacional (ALN), one of the most effective resistance groups fighting against Brazil's military dictatorship. The official story was simple, brilliant police work had tracked down the elusive revolutionary. But many aspects of the ambush immediately raised suspicions. Marighella, who had successfully evaded capture for years despite being the country's most wanted fugitive, suddenly walked into a poorly concealed police trap. He had been extremely cautious, constantly changing hideouts and using elaborate security protocols. Evidence later emerged suggesting the military regime had tortured Dominican friars who knew Marighella to extract information about his movements. The ambush was suspiciously well prepared, with dozens of officers positioned perfectly to cut off any escape routes. Some researchers and former militants have suggested that Marighella may have been betrayed by infiltrators within the resistance movement or even by foreign intelligence agencies. The U.S. had been providing training and support to Brazil's security forces through programs like Operation Condor, aimed at eliminating leftist movements throughout Latin America. What makes Marighella's death particularly suspicious is how it fit into the broader pattern of convenient deaths of left-wing leaders during this period. Throughout Latin America, revolutionary leaders were being eliminated in operations that often appeared to follow similar patterns. Documents declassified decades later confirmed extensive U.S. involvement in tracking Marighella and other revolutionaries, though direct involvement in his death has never been proven. CIA cables from the period show the agency was closely monitoring his activities and considered him a significant threat to stability in Brazil. Was Carlos Marighella simply outmaneuvered in the deadly cat and mouse game he had been playing with the dictatorship? Or did someone from within his organization betray him? The full truth of how Brazil's most careful revolutionary walked into a fatal trap remains elusive. Number 1. Thomas Sankara. How does an entire presidential guard stand down during a coup? Why would a president's closest friend suddenly turn against him? On October 15, 1987, gunfire erupted at the presidential headquarters in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. When the shooting stopped, Thomas Sankara, the 37-year-old president, lay dead along with 12 of his aides. His former friend and deputy Blaise Compaoré announced he had taken power, claiming Sankara had been plotting to have him arrested. Sankara wasn't your typical African leader. During his 4 years in power, he had become known as Africa's Che Guevara, a revolutionary who renamed his country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of incorruptible people. He implemented radical policies, massive vaccination campaigns, promoting women's rights, opposing foreign aid dependency, and challenging the power of the World Bank and former colonial ruler France. The official explanation for his death, that he died during a spontaneous coup, has never been convincing. Witnesses reported seeing a commando group specifically targeting Sankara, while mysteriously leaving his cabinet meeting unharmed. The precision of the assassination suggested careful planning rather than chaotic coup violence. Sankara's body was hastily buried in an unmarked grave, and his widow and supporters were prevented from commissioning an independent autopsy. When his body was finally exhumed in 2015, forensic experts found it riddled with bullets, suggesting an execution rather than death in crossfire. The timing was suspicious. Sankara had been challenging French influence in West Africa and had nationalized land and mineral resources, threatening powerful foreign interests. Just before his death, he had given a speech urging African nations to form a united front to refuse paying debt to former colonial powers. Former French intelligence officer Maurice Delaunay later claimed France had been involved in the coup, though official French government involvement has never been proven. Compaoré, who took power after Sankara's death, immediately reversed many of his predecessors' policies and ruled for 27 years, maintaining close ties with France throughout his long presidency. In 2021, a military trial in Burkina Faso finally began proceedings against Compaoré and 13 others for their alleged roles in Sankara's assassination. Compaoré, who had fled to neighboring Côte d'Ivoire after being ousted in a 2014 uprising, was tried in absentia and ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in the murder. Despite the conviction, many questions remain unanswered. Who gave the orders? Was there foreign involvement? Why did Sankara's security detail fail to protect him? The truth about who really orchestrated the death of one of Africa's most visionary leaders may never be fully known. Could all these deaths really be coincidences? When powerful people die in suspicious circumstances, who really benefits? And how many other political deaths throughout history might not be what they seem?